Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Gentleman Psychic, and welcome to 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. And I have to go on here and share the post. So we will go here and find that I'm live, hopefully. Library. Enjoy your favorite videos. Sign in. I thought I was signed in. Just a second. Signed in as the Gentleman Psychic. Okay, that's it. And library. Your videos. Sorry. Uh, Hi, Seabuck. Hi, Courtney. You did make it. Hi, darling. Um, why can't I find? I can never find where I am on this silly thing. Oh, there we go. Okay. Share this one. Copy the link, and then I come right over here into the comment section. Paste it here. There we go. And we'll post it here. Join me live. "20,000 Leagues Under the Sea." And we post it. And then we have to go over to the other one. Hi, Mary Jane. Hi, Christy. You must forgive me. I'm not wearing a jacket. I feel like I'm underdressed and I'm not wearing any powder, so I look, you know, I look all natural today. But I guess it's what evenings are for. Is this the first reading of this story, or have you started with a new? Yes, this is the second. This is the second set, but basically, I'll catch you up with it. We were talking about in the story. They are on the Abraham Lincoln, which is a ship, and they are looking for this sea monster, which turns out, of course, turns out to be this submarine by Captain Nemo. So we are on chapter 5, but and that's fine, Christy. You don't have to comb your hair. I mean, I'm in public, and I should well have made myself more presentable, but I was feeling somewhat lazy. Anyway, I really love this story. We're going to have a good time tonight. I want you to get really comfortable, get really relaxed, to make certain that you are ready for story time. And if you like, Courtney, you can go back and watch the previous before. I think you won't miss much if we start here, but I think that would be lovely. Hello, hi, Jimmy. Yes. Um, Good evening. Good evening. Good evening. Yes, I'm rather plain today. I look rather plain, but that's okay. That does happen every once in a while. Now, what has been happening in my world? I'll tell you a little bit of a few updates. Mr. Satan was not acting right, my car, and it was difficult, but I rewired it and everything was fine. And then yesterday, I can't remember, I went to start it and it sounds funny and it sounds like the timing might be off. I don't know, but it'll go. I don't know what's wrong with that car. I mean, I do. It's an old car, but I do love that car when it's running properly. What else is new? Oh goodness. I know that we have been talking about a new season of Scared and Alone, so that's good news. Anyway, my loves, that's about all I have. So, without further ado, let us continue with chapter 5 of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. Chapter 5: At a Venture. The voyage of the Abraham Lincoln was for a long time marked by no special incident, but one circumstance happened which showed the wonderful dexterity of Ned Land, and proved that what confidence we might place in him. The 30th of June, the frigate spoke some American whalers, from whom we learned that they know they knew nothing about the narwhal. But one of them, the captain of the Monroe, knowing that Ned Land had shipped on board the Abraham Lincoln, begged for his help in chasing a whale they had in sight. Commander Farragut, desirous of seeing Ned Land at work, gave him permission to go on board the Monroe. And fate served our Canadian so well that instead of one whale, he harpooned two with a double blow, striking one straight to the heart and catching the other after some minutes' pursuit. Decidedly, if the monster ever had to do with Ned Land's harpoon, I would not bet in its favor. The frigate skirted the southeast coast of America with great rapidity. The 3rd of July, we were at an opening of the Straits of Magellan, level with the Cape of Verges. But Commander Farragut would not take the tortuous passage, but doubled Cape Horn. The ship's crew agreed with him, and certainly it was possible that they might meet the narwhal in this narrow pass. Many of the sailors affirmed that the monster could not pass there, that he was too big for that. The 6th of July, about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the Abraham Lincoln, at 15 miles to the south, doubled the solitary island, this last rock at the extremity of the American continent, to which some Dutch sailors gave the name of their native town, Cape Horn. The course was taken toward the northwest, and the next day, the screw of the frigate was last beating the waters of the Pacific. "Keep your eyes open," called out the sailors. But they were opened widely, both eyes, and glasses a little dazzled, it is true, by the prospect of $2,000, had not an instant repose. Day and night they watched the surface of the ocean, and even Nyctalopes, whose faculty of seeing in the darkness multiplies their chances 100-fold, would have had enough to do to gain the prize. I myself, for whom money had no charms, was not the least attentive on board, giving but few minutes to my meals, but a few hours to sleep, indifferent to either rain or sunshine. I did not leave the poop of the vessel. Now, leaning on the netting of the forecastle, now on the taffrail, I devoured with eagerness the soft foam which whitened the sea as far as the eye could reach. And how often have I shared the emotion of the majority of the crew when some capricious whale raised its black back above the waves. The poop of the vessel was crowded in a moment. The cabins poured forth a torrent of sailors and officers, each with heaving breast and troubled eye, watching the course of the cetacean. I looked and looked till I was nearly blind, while counsel, always phlegmatic, kept repeating in a calm voice, "If, sir, you would not squint so much, you would see better." But vain excitement. The Abraham Lincoln checked its speed and made for the animal signaled, a simple whale or common cachalot, which soon disappeared amid the storm of the excursion. But the weather was good. The voyage was being accomplished under the most favorable auspices. It was then the bad season in Australia, the July of that zone corresponding to our January in Europe. But the sea was beautiful and easily scanned round a vast circumference. The 20th of July, the Tropic of Capricorn was cut by 105 degrees of longitude, and the 27th of the same month we crossed the equator on the 110th meridian. This passed, the frigate took more decided westerly direction and scoured the central waters of the Pacific. Commander Farragut thought, with reason, that it was better to remain in deep water and keep clear of continents or islands which the beast itself seemed to shun, Perhaps because there was not enough water for him, suggested the greater part of the crew. The frigate passed at some distance from the Marquess and the Sandwich Islands, crossed the Tropic of Cancer, and made for the China Seas. We were on the theatre of the last diversions of the monster, and, to say the truth, we no longer lived on board. Hearts palpitated fearfully, preparing themselves for future incurable aneurysm. The entire ship's crew was undergoing a nervous excitement of which I can give no idea. They could not eat, they could not sleep. 20 times a day, misconception or an optical illusion of some sailor seated in a taffrail would cause dreadful perspirations, and these emotions, 20 times repeated, kept us in a state of excitement so violent that a reaction was unavoidable. And truly, reaction soon showed itself. For 3 months, during which a day seemed an age, the Abraham Lincoln furrowed all the waters of the northern Pacific, running at Wales, making sharp deviations from her course, veering suddenly from one tack to another, stopping suddenly, putting on steam and backing ever and anon at risk of deranging her machinery, and not one point of the Japanese or American coast was left unexplored. The warmest partisans of the enterprise now became its most ardent detractors. Reaction mounted from the crew to the captain himself, and certainly, had it not been for the resolute determination on the part of Captain Farragut that the frigate would have headed due southward, this useless search could not last much longer. The Abraham Lincoln had nothing to reproach herself with. She had done her best to succeed. Never had an American ship's crew shown more zeal or patience. Its failure could not be placed to their charge. There remained nothing but to return. This was represented to the commander. The sailors could not hide their discontent, and the service suffered. I will not say there was a mutiny on board, but after a reasonable period of obstinacy, Captain Farragut, as Columbus did, asked for 3 days' patience. If in 3 days the monster did not appear, the man at the helm should give 3 turns of the wheel, and the Abraham Lincoln would make for European seas. This promise was made the 2nd of November. It had the effect of rallying the ship's crew. The ocean was watched with renewed attention. Each one wished for one last glance in which to sum up his remembrance. Glasses used with feverish activity. It was a grand defiance given the giant narwhal, and he could scarcely fail to answer the summons and appear. 2 days passed. The steam was at half pressure. 1,000 schemes were tried to attract the attention and to stimulate the apathy of the animal in case it should be met in those parts. Large quantities of bacon were trailed in the wake of the ship, to the great satisfaction, I must say, of the sharks. Small craft radiated in the directions around the Abraham Lincoln as she lay to and did not leave a spot on the sea unexplored. But the night of the 4th of November arrived without the unveiling of this submarine mystery. Chapter 6. At full steam. At this cry, the whole ship's crew hurried toward the harpooner, commander, officers, masters, sailors, cabin boys. Even the engineers left their engines, and the stokers their furnaces. The order to stop had been given, and the frigate now simply went on by her own momentum. The darkness was then profound, and however good the Canadian's eyes were, I asked myself how he had managed to see and what he had been able to see. My heart beat as if it would break, but Ned Land was not mistaken, and we all perceived the object he pointed to. At 2 cables' lengths from the Abraham Lincoln on the starboard quarter, the sea seemed to be ill-maintained all over. It was not a mere phosphoric phenomenon. The monster emerged some fathoms from the water and then threw out that very intense but inexplicable light mentioned in the report of several captains. The magnificent irradiation must have been produced by an agent of great shining power. The luminous para traced on the sea an immense oval which elongated, the center of which condensed a burning heat whose overpowering brilliancy died out by the successive gradations. It is only an agglomeration of phosphoric particles, cried one of the officers. No, sir, certainly not, I replied. Never did the phosphorus or the self produce such powerful light. That brightness is of an essentially electrical nature. Besides, see, it moves. It is moving forward, backward. It is darting toward us. A general cry, those from the frigate. Silence, said the captain. Up with the helm. Reverse the engines. The steam was shut off, and the Abraham Lincoln, beating to the port, described a semicircle. Right the helm. Go ahead, cried the captain. These orders were executed, and the frigate moved rapidly from the burning light. I was mistaken. She tried to sheer off, but the supernatural animal approached with a velocity double her own. We gasped for breath. Stupefaction, more than fear, made us dumb and motionless. The animal gained on us, made us dumb and motionless, sporting with the waves. It made the round of the frigate, which was then making 14 knots, and enveloped it with its electric rings like a luminous dust. Then it moved away 2 or 3 miles, leaving the phosphorescent track like those volumes of steam that the express trains leave behind. All at once, from the dark line of horizon, whither it retired to gain its momentum, the monster rushed suddenly toward the Abraham Lincoln with alarming rapidity, stopped suddenly about 20 feet from the hull, and died out, not diving under the water, for its brilliancy did not abate, but suddenly, and as if the source of this brilliant emanation was exhausted. Then it reappeared on the other side of the vessel, as if it had turned and slid under the hull. Any moment a collision might have occurred which would have been fatal to us. However, I was astonished at the maneuvers of the frigate. She fled and did not attack. On the captain's face, generally so impressive, was an expression of unaccountable astonishment. Mr. Arnaud, he said, I do not know with what formidable being I have to deal, and I will not imprudently risk my frigate in the midst of this darkness. Besides, how attack this unknown thing? How defend oneself from it? Wait for daylight, and the scene will change. You have no further doubt, Captain, of the nature of the animal. No, sir. It is evidently a gigantic narwhal, and an electric one. Perhaps, added I, only one can only approach it with a gigantus or a torpedo. Undoubtedly, replied the captain. If it possesses such dreadful power, it is the most terrible animal that was ever created. That is why, sir, I must be on my guard. The crew were on their feet all night. No one thought of sleep. The Abraham Lincoln, not being able to struggle with such velocity, had moderated its pace and sailed at half speed. For its part, the narwhal, imitating the frigate, let the waves rock it at will, and seemed decided not to leave the scene of the struggle. Toward midnight, however, it disappeared, or to us, a more appropriate term, it died out, like a large glowworm. Had it fled? One could only fear it, not hope it. But at 7 minutes to 1 o'clock in the morning, a deafening whistling was heard, like that produced by a body of water rushing with great violence. The captain, Ned Land, and I were on the poop, eagerly peering through the profound darkness. Ned Land asked the commander, You have often heard the roaring of the whales. Often, sir, but never such whales, the sight of which brought me in $2,000, if I can only approach within 4 harpoon lengths of it. But to approach it, said the commander, I ought to put a whaler at your disposal. Certainly, sir. That will be trifling with the lives of my men. And mine too, simply said the harpooner. Toward 2 o'clock in the morning, the burning light reappeared, not less intense, about 5 miles to windward of the Abraham Lincoln. Notwithstanding the distances and the noise of the wind and the sea, one heard distinctly the loud strokes of the animal's tail and even its panting breath. It seemed that, at the moment, that the enormous narwhal had come to take a breath at the surface of the water. The air was engulfed in its lungs like the steam in the vast cylinders of a machine of 2,000 horsepower. Thought I, a whale with the strength of the cavalry regiment would be a pretty whale. We were on the qui vive till daylight, and prepared for the combat. The fishing implements were laid along the hammock nettings. The second lieutenant loaded the blunderbusses, which could throw harpoons to the distance of a mile, and long duck guns with explosive bullets, which inflicted mortal wounds even to the most terrible animals. Ned Land contented himself with sharpening his harpoon, a terrible weapon in the hands. At 6 o'clock, day began to break, and with the first glimmer of light, the electric light of the narwhal disappeared. At 7 o'clock, the day was sufficiently advanced, but a very thick sea fog obscured our view, and the best spy glasses could not pierce it. That caused disappointment and anger. I climbed the mizzen mast. Some officers were already perched on the mast heads. At 8 o'clock, the fog lay heavily on the waves, and its thick scrolls rose little by little. The horizon grew wider and cleaner at the same time. Suddenly, just as on the day before, Ned Land's voice was heard. The thing itself on the port quarter, cried the harpooner. Every eye was turned toward the point indicated. There, a mile and a half from the frigate, a long blackish body emerged a yard above the waves. Its tail, violently agitated, produced a considerable eddy. Never did a never did a caudal appendage beat the sea with such violence. An immense track of dazzling whiteness marked the passage of the animal and described a long curve. The frigate approached the cetacean. I examined it thoroughly. The reports of the Shannon and of the Helvetia had rather exaggerated its size, and I estimated its length at only 250 feet. As to its dimensions, I could only conjecture them to be admirably proportioned. While I watched this phenomenon, 2 jets of steam and water were ejected from its vents and rose to the height of 120 feet. Thus I ascertained its way of breathing. I concluded definitely that it belonged to the vertebrate branch class of Mammalia. The crew waited impatiently for their chief's orders. The latter, after having observed the animal attentively, called the engineer. The engineer ran to him. "Sir," said the commander, "you have steam up." "Yes, sir," answered the engineer. "Well, make up your fires and put on the steam." 3 hurrahs greeted this order. The time for the struggle had arrived. Some moments after, the 2 funnels of the frigate vomited torrents of black smoke, and the bridge quaked under the trembling of the boilers. The Abraham Lincoln, propelled by her powerful screw, went straight at the animal. The latter allowed it to come within half a cable's length. Then, if disdaining to dive, it took a little turn and stopped a short distance off. This pursuit lasted nearly 3/4 of an hour, without the frigate gaining 2 yards on the cetacean. It was quite evident that at the rate we should never come up with it. Well, Mr. Land, asked the captain, do you advise me to put the boats out to sea? No, sir, replied Ned Land, because we shall not take that beast easily. What shall we do then? Put on more steam if you can, sir. With your leave, I mean to post myself under the bowsprit, and if we get within harpooning distance, I shall throw my harpoon. Go, Ned, said the captain. Engineer, put on more pressure. Ned Land went to his post. The fires were increased, the screw revolved 43 times a minute, and the steam poured out of the valves. We heaved the log and calculated the Abraham Lincoln was going at the rate of 18.5 miles an hour. But the accursed animal swam too at the rate of 18.5 miles. For a whole hour, the frigate kept up this pace without gaining 6 feet. It was humiliating for one of the swiftest sailors in the American Navy. A stubborn anger seized the crew. The sailors abused the monster who, as before, disdained to answer them. The captain no longer contented himself with twisting his beard, he gnawed it. The engineer was again called. You have turned full steam on. Yes, sir, replied the engineer. The speed of the Abraham Lincoln increased. Its mast trembled down to their stepping holes, and the clouds of smoke could hardly find out the narrow funnels. They heaved the log a second time. Well, asked the captain of the man at the wheel. 19 miles and 3/10, sir. Clap on more steam. The engineer obeyed. The manometer showed 10 degrees, but the cetacean grew warm itself, no doubt, for without straining itself, it made 19 and 3/16 miles. What a pursuit! No, I cannot describe the emotion that vibrated through me. Ned Land kept his post, his harpoon in hand. Several times the animal let us gain upon it. We shall catch it, we shall catch it, cried the Canadian. But just as we were going to strike the cetacean, stole away with rapidity that could not be estimated at less than 30 miles an hour, and even during our maximum of speed, it bullied the frigate, going round and around it. A cry of fury broke from one to another. At noon, we were no further advanced than at 8 o'clock in the morning. The captain then decided to take more direct means. Ah, said he, that animal goes quicker than the Abraham Lincoln. Very well. We will see whether it will escape these conical bullets. Send your men to the forecastle, sir. The forecastle gun was immediately loaded and slewed round, but the shot passed some feet above the cetacean, which was half a mile off. Another more to the right, cried the commander, and $5 to whoever will hit the infernal beast. The old gunner, with a grey beard that I can see now, with steady eye and grave face, went up to the gun and took a long aim. A loud report was heard, with which were mingled the cheers of the crew. The bullets did its work. It hit the animal, but not fatally, and sliding off the rounded surfaces, was lost in 2 miles' depth of sea. The change began again, and the captain, leaning toward me, said, I will pursue that beast till my frigate bursts up. Yes, answered I, and you will be quite right to do it. I wished the beast would exhaust itself, and not be insensible to fatigue, like a steam engine. But it was of no use. Hours passed without it showing any sign of exhaustion. However, it must be said in praise of the Abraham Lincoln that she struggled on indefatigably. I cannot reckon the distance she made under the 300 miles during this unlucky day, November the 6th, but night came on and overshadowed the rough ocean. Now I thought our expedition was at an end, and that we should never again see that extraordinary animal. I was mistaken. At 10 minutes to 11 in the evening, the electric light reappeared 3 miles to windward of the frigate, as pure, as intense, as during the preceding night. The narwhal seemed motionless, perhaps tired with its day's work. It slept, letting itself float with the undulation of the waves. Now was a chance of which the captain resolved to take advantage. He gave his orders. The Abraham Lincoln kept up half steam and advanced cautiously so as not to wake its adversary. It is no rare thing to meet in the middle of the ocean whales so sound asleep that they can be so fully attacked, and Ned Land had harpooned more than one during its sleep. The Canadian went to take his place again under the bowsprit. The frigate approached noiselessly, stopped at 2 cables' length from the animal, and following its track, no one breathed. A deep silence reigned on the bridge. We were not 100 feet from the burning focus of light, of which increased and dazzled our eyes. At this moment, leaning on the forecastle bulwark, I saw below me Ned Land grappling the martingale in one hand, brandishing his terrible harpoon in the other. Scarcely 20 feet from the motionless animal, suddenly his arm straightened, and the harpoon was thrown. I heard the sonorous stroke of the weapon, which seemed to have struck a hard body. The electric light went out suddenly, and 2 enormous waterspouts broke over the bridge of the frigate, rushing like a torrent from stem to stern, overthrowing men and and lashing the spars. A fearful shock followed, and thrown over the rail without having time to stop myself, I fell into the sea. Chapter 7. Hi, Scotty. Chapter 7. An unknown species of whale. This unexpected fall so stunned me that I have no clear recollection of my sensations at this time. I was at first drawn down to a depth of about 20 feet. I am a good swimmer, though without pretending to rival Byron, or Edgar Allan Poe, who were masters of the art. And in that plunge, I did not lose my presence of mind. 2 vigorous strokes brought me up to the surface of water. My first care was to look for the frigate. Had the crew seen me disappear? Had the Abraham Lincoln veered round? Would the captain put out a boat? Might I hope to be saved? The darkness was intense. I caught a glimpse of a black mass disappearing at the east. It's a beacon, lights dying out in the distance. It was the frigate. I was lost. Help! Help! I shouted, swimming toward the Abraham Lincoln in desperation. My clothes encumbered me. They seemed glued to my body and paralyzed my movements. I was sinking. I was suffocating. Help! This was my last cry. My mouth filled with water. I struggled against being drawn down the abyss. Suddenly, my clothes were seized by a strong hand, and I felt myself quickly drawn up to the surface of the sea. And I heard, yes, I heard these words pronounced in my ear. If Master would be so good as to lean on my shoulder, Master would swim with much greater ease. I seized with one hand my faithful counsel's arm. Is it you? Said I. You? Myself, answered counsel, and waiting Master's orders. That shock threw you as well as me into the sea. No, but being in my master's service, I followed him. The worthy fellow thought that was but natural. And the frigate, I asked. The frigate, replied counsel, turning on his back. I think that master had better not count too much on her. You think so? I say that, at the time I threw myself into the sea, I heard the men at the wheel say, the screw and the rudder are broken. Broken? Yes, broken, by the monster's teeth. It is the only injury the Abraham Lincoln has sustained, but it is a bad lookout for us. She no longer answers her helm. Then we are lost. Perhaps so, calmly answered Council. However, we have still hours before us, and one can do a good deal in some hours. Council's imperturbable coolness set me up again. I swam more vigorously, but cramped by my clothes, which stuck to me like a leaden weight. I felt great difficulty in the bearing up. Council saw this. Council's imp, um, Council's imperturbable coolness set me up once again. I swam more vigorously, but cramped by my clothes, which stuck to me like leaden weights. I felt great difficulty in bearing up. Council saw this. Will master let me make a slit? Said he, and slipping an open knife under my clothes, he ripped them up from top to bottom very rapidly. Then he cleverly slipped them off me while I swam for both of us. Then I did the same for Council, and we continued to swim near to each other. Nevertheless, our situation was no less terrible. Perhaps our disappearance had not been noticed, and if it had been, the frigate could not tack, being without its helm. Council argued on this suspicion and laid his plans accordingly. This phlegmatic boy was perfectly self-possessed. We then decided that, as our only chance of safety was being picked up by the Abraham Lincoln's boats, we ought to manage so as to wait for them as long as possible. I resolved then to husband our strength so that both should not be exhausted at the same time, and this is how we managed. While one of us lay on our back, quite still, with arms crossed and legs stretched out, the other would swim and push the other in front. This towing business did not last more than 10 minutes each, and relieving each other thus, we could swim for some hours, perhaps till daybreak. Poor chance, but hope is so firmly rooted in the heart of man. Moreover, there were two of us. Indeed, I declare, though it may seem improbable, if I sought to destroy all hope, if I wished to despair, I could not. The collision of the frigate with the cetacean had occurred at about 11 o'clock the evening before. I reckoned, then we should have 8 hours to swim before sunrise, an operation quite practical if we relieved each other. The sea, very calm, was in our favor. Sometimes I tried to pierce the intense darkness that was only dispelled by the phosphorescence caused by our movements. I watched the luminous waves that broke over my hand, whose mirror-like surface was spotted with silvery rings. One might have said that we were in a bath of quicksilver. Near 1 o'clock in the morning, I was seized with dreadful fatigue. My limbs stiffened under the strain of violent cramp. Council was obliged to keep me up, and our preservation devolved on him alone. I heard the poor boy pant. His breathing became short and hurried. I found that he could not keep up much longer. Leave me, I said to him. Leave my master? Never, replied he. I would drown first. Just then the moon appeared through the fringes of the thick cloud that the wind was driving to the east. The surface of the sea glittered with its rays. This kindly light reanimated us. My head got better again. I looked at all the points of the horizon. I saw the frigate. She was 5 miles from us and looked like a dark mass, hardly discernible. But no boats. I would have cried out, but what good would it have done at such distance? My swollen lips could utter no sounds. Council could articulate some words, and I heard him repeat at intervals, "Help, help." Our movements were suspended for an instant. We listened. It might be only a singing in the ear, but it seemed to me as a cry answered the cry of Council. "Did you hear?" I murmured. "Yes, yes," said Council. Gave one more despairing call. This time there was no mistake. A human voice responded to ours. Was it the voice of another unfortunate creature abandoned in the middle of the ocean, some other victim of shock sustained by the vessel? Or rather, was it a boat from the frigate that was hailing us in the darkness? Counsel made a last effort, and leaning on my shoulder while I struck out in a disparaging effort, he raised himself half out of the water, then fell back exhausted. What did you see? I saw, he murmured. I saw, but I do not talk. Reserve your strength. What had he seen? Then I know not why. He thought of monster come into my mind for the first time, but that voice, that time is past for Jonas to take refuge in whales' bellies. However, Counsel was towing me again. He raised his head sometimes, looked before us, and uttered a cry of recognition, which was responded to by a voice that came nearer and nearer. I scarcely heard it. My strength was exhausted. My fingers stiffened. My hand afforded me support no longer. My mouth, convulsively opening, filled with salt water. Cold crept over me. I raised my head for the last time. Then I sank. At this moment, a hard body struck me. I clung to it. Then I felt that I was being drawn up, that I was brought to the surface of the water, that my chest collapsed. I fainted. It was certain that I soon came to, thanks to the vigorous rubbings that I received. I half opened my eyes. Counsel, I murmured. Does master call me? Asked Counsel. Just then, by the wanting light of the moon, which was sinking down of the horizon, I saw a face which was not Counsel's, and which I immediately recognized. Ned, I cried. The same, sir. Who is seeking his prize? Replied the Canadian. Were you thrown out into the sea by the shock of the frigate? Yes, Professor, but more fortunate than you. I was able to find a footing almost directly upon a floating island. An island? Or more correctly speaking, on our gigantic narwhal. Explain yourself, Ned. Only I soon found out why my harpoon had not entered its skin, and it was blunted. Why, Ned? Why? Because, Professor, that beast is made of sheet iron. The Canadian's last words produced a sudden revolution in my brain. I wriggled myself quickly to the top of the being, or rather object, half out of the water, which served us as a refuge. I kicked it. It was evidently hard, impenetrable body, and not the soft substances that forms the bodies of the great marine mammalia. But this hard body might be a bony caprace like that of the antediluvian animals, and I should be free to class this monster among the amphibious reptiles, which, as tortoise or alligators, well, no, the blackish back that supported me was smooth, polished, without scales. The blow produced metallic sound, and incredible though it may be, it seemed, I might say, as if it were made of riveted plates. There was no doubt about it. This monster was this natural phenomenon that had puzzled the learned world and overthrown and misled the imagination of seamen of both hemispheres was, it must be owned, a still more astonishing phenomenon, inasmuch as it was simply a human construction. We had no time to lose, however. We were lying upon the back of a sort of submarine boat, which appeared, as far as I could judge, like a huge fish of steel. Ned Land's mind was made up on this point. Counsel and I could only agree with him. Just then, a bubbling began at the back of this strange thing, which was evidently propelled by a screw, and it began to move. We had only just a minute to seize hold of the upper part, which rose about 7 feet out of the water, and happily its speed was not great. As long as it sails horizontally, muttered Ned Land, I do not mind, but if it takes a fancy to dive, I would not give 2 straws for my life. The Canadian might have said still less. it becomes really necessary to communicate with the beings, whatever they were, shut up inside the machine. I searched all over the outside for an aperture, a panel, or a manhole, to use a technical expression, but the lines of the iron rivets, solidly driven into the joints of the iron plates, were clear and uniform. Besides, the moon disappeared then, and left us in total darkness. At last, this long night passed. My indistinct remembrance prevents my describing all the impressions it made. I can only recall one circumstance. During some lulls of the wind and sea, I fancied I heard several times vague sounds, a sort of fugitive harmony produced by distinct words of command. What was then the mystery of this submarine craft, of which the whole world vainly sought an explanation? What kind of beings existed in this strange boat? What mechanical agent caused its prodigious speed? Daybreak appeared. The morning mist surrounded us, but they soon cleared off. I was about to examine the hull, which formed on deck a kind of horizontal platform, when I felt it gradually sinking. "Oh, confound it!" cried Ned Land, kicking the resounding plate. "Open, you inhospitable rascals!" Happily, the sinking movement ceased. Suddenly, a noise like ironworks violently pushed aside came from the interior of the boat. One iron plate was moved. A man appeared, uttered an odd cry, and disappeared immediately. Some moments after, eight strong men with masked faces appeared noiselessly and drew us down into their formidable machine. Chapter 8. Mobilis in the Mobile. This forcible abduction, so roughly carried out, was accomplished with rapidity of lightning. I shivered all over. Whom had we to deal with? No doubt some new sort of pirates who explored the sea in their own way. Hardly the narrow panel closed upon me when I was enveloped in darkness. My eyes, dazzled with the outer light, could distinguish nothing. I felt my naked feet cling to the rings of the iron ladder. Ned Land and Council, firmly seized, followed me. At the bottom of the ladder, a door opened and shut after us immediately with a bang. We were alone. Where I could not say, hardly imagine, all was black, and such a dense black that after some minutes my eyes had not been able to discern even the faintest glimmer. Meanwhile, Ned Land, furious at these proceedings, gave free vent to his indignation. "Confound it," cried he. "Here are people who come up from the Scotch or hospitality. They are only just miss being cannibals. I should not be surprised at all. But I declare that they shall not eat me without my protesting." "Calm yourself, friend Ned, calm yourself," replied Council quietly. "Do not cry out before you are hurt. We are not quite done for yet." "Not quite," sharply replied the Canadian, "but pretty near it at all events. Things look black. Happily, any bowie knife I have still, and I can always see well enough to use it. The first of these pirates who lays a hand on me—" "Do not excite yourself, Ned," I said to the harpooner, "and do not compromise us by useless violence. Who knows that they will not listen to us? Let us rather try to find out where we are." I groped round about. In 5 steps I came to an iron wall made of plates bolted together. Then, turning back, I struck against a wooden table near which were ranged several stools. The boards of this prison were concealed under a thick mat of phorium which deadened the noise of the feet. The bare walls revealed no trace of window or door. Council, going round the reverse way, met me, and we went back to the middle in the cabin, which measured about 20 feet by 10. As to its height, Ned Land, in spite of his own great height, could not measure it. Half an hour had already passed without our situation being bettered. When the dense darkness suddenly gave way to extreme light, our prison was suddenly lighted. That is to say, it became filled with a luminous matter so strong that I could not bear it first. In its whiteness and intensity, I recognized that electric light which played round the submarine boat like a magnificent phenomenon of phosphorescence. After shutting my eyes involuntarily, I opened them and saw this luminous agent came from a half globe, unpolished, placed in the roof of the cabin. "At last one can see," cried Ned Land, who, knife in hand, stood on the defensive. "Yes," said I, "but we are still in the dark about ourselves." "Let master have patience," said the imperturbable counsel. The sudden lighting of the cabin enabled me to examine it minutely. It only contained a table and 5 stools. The invisible door might be hermetically sealed. No noise was heard. All seemed dead in the interior of this boat. Did it move? Did it float on the surface of the ocean? Or did it dive into its depths? I could not guess. A noise of bolts was now heard. The door opened, and 2 men appeared. One was short, very muscular, broad-shouldered, with robust limbs, strong head, an abundance of black hair, thick moustache, a quick, penetrating look, and the vivacity which characterizes the population of southern France. The second stranger merits a more detailed description. A disciple of Gratulet or Engel would have read his face like an open book. I made out his prevailing qualities directly: self-confidence, because his head was well set on his shoulders, and his black eyes looked round with cold assurance; calmness, for his skin, rather pale, showed his coolness of blood energy, evinced by the rapid contraction of his lofty brows; and courage, because his deep breathing denoted great power of lungs. Whether this person was 35 or 50 years of age, I could not say. He was tall, he had a large forehead, straight nose, a clearly cut mouth, beautiful teeth, with fine taper hands, indicative of a highly nervous temperament. This man was certainly the most admirable specimen I had ever met. One particular feature was his eyes, rather far from each other, and which could take in nearly a quarter of the horizon at once. This faculty, I verified it later, gave him a range of vision far superior to Ned Land's. When this stranger fixed upon an object, his eyebrows met, his large eyelids closed around as to contract the range of his vision, and he looked as if he magnified the objects lessened by distance, as if he pierced those sheets of water so opaque to our eyes, and as if he read the very depths of the seas. The 2 strangers, with caps made from the fur of the sea otter and shod with sea boots of seal skins, were dressed in clothes of a particular texture which allowed free movement of the limbs. The taller of the 2, evidently the chief on board, examined us with great attention, without saying a word, then turning to his companion, talked with him in an unknown tongue. It was sonorous, harmonious, and flexible dialect, the vowels seeming to admit a very varied accent. The other replied by a shake of the head and added 2 or 3 perfectly incomprehensible words. Then he seemed to question me by a look. I replied in good French that I did not know his language, but he seemed not to understand me, and my situation became more embarrassing. "If master were to tell our story," said counsel, "perhaps these gentlemen may understand some words." I began to tell our adventure, articulating each syllable clearly, and without omitting one single detail. I announced our names and rank, introducing in person Professor Arnon, his servant, Council, and Master Ned Land, the harpooner. The man with his soft, calm eyes listened to me quietly, even politely, and with extreme attention, but nothing in his countenance indicated that he had understood my story. When I finished, he said not a word. There remained one resource to speak English. Perhaps they would know this almost universal language. I know it as well as German language, well enough to read it fluently but not speak it correctly. But anyhow, we must make ourselves understood. Go on in, take your turn, I said to the harpooner. Speak your best Anglo-Saxon, and try to do better than I. Ned did not beg off and recommended our story. To his great disgust, the harpooner did not seem to have made himself more intelligible than I had. Our visitors did not stir. They evidently understood neither the language of the Arengo or the Faraday. Very much embarrassed, after having vainly exhausted our philosophical resources, I knew not what part to take when Council said, "If master will permit me, I will relate in German." But in spite of the elegant turns and the good accent of the narrator, the German language had no success. At last, nonplussed, I tried to remember my first lessons and to narrate our adventure in Latin, but with no better success. This last attempt being of no avail, the two strangers exchanged some words in their own unknown language and retired, the door shut. "It is an infamous shame," cried Ned Land, who broke out for the 20th time. "We speak to those rogues in French, English, German, and Latin, and not one of them has the politeness to answer." "Calm yourself," I said to the impetuous Ned. "Anger will do you no good." "But you see, Professor," replied our irascible companion, "that we shall absolutely die of hunger in this iron cage." "Bah," said Council philosophically, "we can hold out some time yet." "My friends," I said, "we must not despair. We've been worse off than this. Do me a favor to wait a little before forming an opinion upon the commander and crew of this boat." "My opinion is formed," replied Ned Land sharply. "They are rascals." "Good. And from what country?" "From the land of rogues." "My brave Ned, that country is not clearly indicated on the map of the world, but I admit that the nationality of the two strangers is hard to determine. Neither English, French, nor German, that is quite certain. However, I am inclined to think that the commander and his companion were born in low latitudes. There is southern blood in them, but I cannot decide by their appearance whether they are Spaniards, Turks, Arabians, Indians. As to their language, it is quite incomprehensible." "There is the disadvantage of not knowing all the languages," said Council, "or the disadvantage of not having one universal language." As he said these words, the door opened. A steward entered. He brought us clothes, coats and trousers made of stuff I did not know. I hastened to dress myself, and my companion followed my example. During that time, the steward, dumb perhaps, deaf, had arranged the table and laid 3 plates. "This is something like," said Council. "Bah," said the rancorous harpooner. "What do you suppose they eat here? Tortoise liver? Filleted shark? Beefsteaks from sea dogs?" "We shall see," said Council. The dishes of bell metal were placed on the table, and we took our places. Undoubtedly, we had to do with civilized people, and had it not been for the electric light which flooded us, I could have fancied I was dining room of the Adelphi Hotel at Liverpool, or at the Grand Hotel in Paris. I must say, however, that there was neither bread nor wine. The water was fresh and clear, but it was water and did not suit Ned Land's taste. Among the dishes which were brought to us, I recognized several fish delicately dressed, but of some, although excellent, I could give no opinion, neither could I tell to what kingdom they belonged, whether animal or vegetable. As to the dinner service, it was elegant, and in perfect time. Each utensil, spoon, fork, knife, plate, had a letter engraved on it, with a motto above it, of which is an exact facsimile: Mobilis in mobile, N. The letter N was no doubt the initial of the name of the enigmatical person who commanded at the bottom of the seas. Ned Land and Council did not reflect much. They devoured the food, and I did likewise. I was besides reassured as to our fates, and it seemed evident that our hosts would not let us die of want. One moment. However, everything has an end. Everything passes away, even the hunger of people who have not eaten for 15 hours. Our appetite satisfied, we felt overcome with sleep. Faith, I shall sleep well, said Council. So shall I, replied Ned Land. My two companions stretched themselves on the cabin carpet and were soon sound asleep. For my own part, too, many thoughts crowded my brain, too many insoluble questions pressed upon me, too many fancies kept my eyes half open. Where were we? What strange power carried us on? I felt, or rather fancied I felt, the machine sinking down to the lowest beds of the sea. Dreadful nightmares beset me. I saw in my mysterious asylum a world of unknown animals, among which the submarine boat seemed to be the same kind, living, moving, and formidable as they. Then my brain grew calmer, my imagination wandered into vague unconsciousness, and I soon fell into a deep sleep. And that is where we end for the evening. Thank you, my lovelies, for joining me tonight. Join me next week as we continue in 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. If you do check back, because I may or may not. I always say that I might, and then I haven't so far, so don't really expect it. But I might come back and read to you this week. I would like to anyway. With that, thank you for all the likes, the comments, the shares. It really does help me out. Thank you to all of my supporters. That really helps me out. It's a great way to support the channel. And with that, my lovelies, I bid you good night, and I will see you on the morrow. Many of you. Good night. Take care.